Now today we're going to talk about design guidelines applied to residential neighborhoods and planned communities. And we live in the largest planned community in the U.S., Irvine. And the topics that we're going to cover are how we went from the growth of mass-produced housing right after World War II, where there was this influx of guys returning from the war, starting families. There was a baby boom. People needed affordable housing. They had this dream of having their own place. And certain developers stepped in and made that happen, such as the Levitt brothers in New York. And they developed Levittown in New York and then also expanded it to Pennsylvania. But there were a lot of concerns about this massive production of very affordable and profitable housing. The developers made a lot of money on this because people were snapping up their houses as fast as they could build them. But people started to criticize the sprawl and the monotony of these tract housing developments. So during the 1960s, we saw the emergence of sort of a counterpoint to all of this, namely the New Towns Planned Community movement and what's called intentional communities movement, which are things like co-housing, communes, where people wanted to create more individualized and interesting places to live. They didn't want to just live in this massive box array of tract houses. So we saw these huge master plan communities evolve, and Columbia, Maryland, Reston, Virginia, Irvine are all examples of those. And what a lot of the developers try to do is incorporate findings and concepts from research, from urban planning, from environmental psychology, into their design implementation plans and their design guidelines. So we're going to see a lot of examples of that today to create more effective, more positive communities. Whether they succeeded in doing that, the data are still out, but there have been a number of studies on these topics, so we'll also review some of those. So here's what was happening after World War II. And you see this monograph on the upper left there, Planning Profitable Communities. So the developers had a huge opportunity here with the influx of people returning from the war. There was a surge of optimism. People wanted to start families. There was this ideal of owning your own home and having your nuclear family live in your own place. So they began to develop places like Levittown, which was one of the first massively planned tract housing communities in the U.S. It started on Long Island, and then when U.S. Steel opened a plant in Morrisville, Pennsylvania, the Levitt brothers moved in there. They saw a captive market of workers that were going to be moving there, living there, and they created Levittown, Pennsylvania. And you see the influence of those tract home communities in Fountain Valley and other places in Southern California where you have a very similar, can you go back to the previous one for a minute? Yeah, you have a very similar kind of array of houses stacked one on the other in small blocks. And this is one particular neighborhood, Talbert Village in Fountain Valley. And so as a counterpoint to some of that, the planned communities movement began. And one of the foremost proponents of that was Ray Watson, the first president of the Irvine Company. And he's pictured here doing some of his early design work for the city of Irvine. And last year there was a dedication of his papers and a lot of his resources to the UCI library because he's been a supporter of the urban planning program here at UCI. And in fact, there's a $1 million endowed fellowship campaign now within PPD to assist students in urban studies and planning. This is Irit Mayor. She did her Master's of Urban and Regional Planning in Social Ecology and PPD. And she did a study of planned communities, namely Irvine's Woodbridge as compared to Fountain Valley. So she did a comparative study of people's reactions to those two places. And some of the symbols and themes you find in these planned communities are typified by Woodbridge, where you have a very heavy emphasis on natural elements. You have two human-made lakes there. You've got some views of the mountains. You've got bike trails that surround the lakes. You've got very sort of clear branding with the name of the village and the fence and wall, the small wall that goes around much of that property. And you can see the cul-de-sac design of the roads here to kind of separate the population from a lot of the higher volume traffic on the arterials. So how many of you grew up in Woodbridge or in Irvine, actually? How many of you? Okay. So you can relate to some of these things. And in fact, I'm going to be showing a video that was filmed by some Woodbridge High School students later today. So the research that has been done on planned communities is exemplified by these two books. In 1976, at the University of North Carolina, Raymond Burby and Shirley Weiss published their study of about 15 different planned communities, and Irvine was included among those, along with Reston and Columbia, so some other communities in Texas and areas around the U.S. Irvine had a very strong emphasis on sense of place. Ray Watson was trained at Berkeley in the planning program. He studied Kevin Lynch, and you'll see from a lot of the design guidelines that he applied in Irvine that he was trying to create this highly imageable, legible place, as well as bring in Ebenezer Howard's notion of the garden city. So there's a lot of emphasis on getting people in close touch with nature in Irvine. Columbia, Maryland had a little bit more emphasis on racial integration, and a lot of their symbolism and their goals, as stated in their long-range plan, was to create harmonious interracial living in that community. And then there's Woodland, Texas, where there's an emphasis on habitat preservation, organic architecture a la Frank Lloyd Wright. And so you'll see some examples of these today as we go through them. Now, we said that environmental psychology provides a toolbox of many different concepts and findings that can be applied as a basis for design guidelines, whether it's for classrooms, shopping centers, homes, urban spaces like William White's film, or residential communities. So you can take any number of these, and you did this last Tuesday in class where you took a concept and you developed a design guideline based on it. You can see as we've gone through a number of different examples when we talked about urban space, like Arco Santi, the different concepts that are applied there. So here they're trying to take ecology and fuse it with architecture, minimize the imprint or the footprint of the building on the land by building up more vertically, by controlling sort of the temperature and the climate and the other conditions within this structure, the envelope of the community. So this arcology principle was very much emphasized in Solari's work, and this is discussed in Altman and Schemmer's chapter on Cities of the Future, which is assigned for today. So Solari's Arco Santi is one of the examples there. In Reston, Virginia, you see some other principles we've talked about. We've talked about walkability. How do you make a community human scale and walkable and comfortable for pedestrians? So you have a downtown of Reston which has a lot of emphasis on sittable space, on street trees. There's an ice rink in the middle of the town where people can gather around and watch the kids skate. You've got vendors, very much like we have on Ring Mall here on campus, where people set up shop, and it creates a kind of social space that humanizes and brings those tall buildings down to more of a human scale. So those are some principles in Reston. In Irvine, Ray Watson and his team of planners, and one of them was Bob Dannenbrink, and his article on the Urban Design Implementation Plan for Irvine is assigned for today also. And when we talk about a design implementation plan for a city, it's a policy-oriented set or package of urban design goals, principles, policies, and guidelines for particular elements having major impacts on the city's form and character. So you see this kind of concentric circular pattern at UCI. Comes right out of Watson's reading of Lynch on districts, edges, creating focal points or nodes. Some would argue that Aldrich Park isn't much of a node. It's more of a sort of a diffuse district that people go to contact or be in touch with nature, but it's not so much a place where clubs meet or people get together. But nonetheless, you see some of those principles in the Irvine implementation plan. And some of the key elements of that design implementation plan include things like the road hierarchy, separating people from the freeway, high-volume traffic down to the inner cul-de-sacs that go through our residential areas. streetscape design to make the different levels of road very imageable and legible to people so they know where they are. That gradient that Chris Alexander talks about from public to private is very much part of the streetscape design principles here. A lot of open space, the idea of creating several villages that people can choose among for where they want to live. So we've got Woodbridge, we've got University Park, Turtle Rock, Northwood, West Park. Making the Civic Center very prominent. It's not in a very central location, but it is a prominently constructed kind of building. When you see it, you know it's a Civic Center when you come upon it on Harvard. And that ties in with some of the new urbanism ideas of making civic identity stronger in a community, though we've said that Irvine really doesn't constitute a new urbanist community. And then there were to be commercial and retail centers. There were to be different age groups accommodated, whether it be children or seniors and teenagers. So again, we can ask whether Irvine has done that effectively, but that was what the goals were when they started with this design implementation approach. So here you see the road hierarchy, and there are 5 levels of roads going from the freeways to the north-south arterials, which would be like Culver, Jamboree, and then you've got the east-west arterials like Alton, Barranca. And then you get to these village collector roads. So this is Yale Loop Drive around Woodbridge. This is Turtle Rock Drive. And then coming off of those collector roads within each village, you've got the cul-de-sacs where you have the lowest speed and lowest volume of traffic. And in terms of streetscape design, there was a very detailed set of principles established by Ray Watson's planners to create that intimacy gradient. So here you might be driving along Culver, and you're going to turn into an entrance for West Park, which is one of the villages. And what the designers are trying to do here is announce that you're making a change. You're going from one level of publicness or formality to a more private neighborhood. So they texture the pavement, they put a kind of landscaping that announces that you're going through an entry point to create that kind of gradient. So that's an example of how they took some of these principles we've been talking about and built them into the structure of Irvine's street system. We've talked about residential villages, and you can see some of those principles repeated in the villages where you've got the village collector road. You've got the activity corridor here in Woodbridge, which serves as sort of your high-density nodes. You've got the people-made lakes to bring people into contact with nature. And this is the University Town Center plan, which originally, when it was designed, was intended to be much more mixed use. There were going to be people actually living on top of the shops in the shopping center. So where you have places like Pete's Coffee and you have Brita's Cafe and things like that. There were actually going to be another story of lofts and residences up there, but that didn't quite pass muster with the planners. But nonetheless, it's a fairly mixed-use kind of area between the housing here and the shopping center, and then you've got the San Joaquin Park, which brings the heavy contact with nature, the proximity to nature. We talked about nature a lot in Irvine and in Woodland Hills in Texas, and you can see it here in terms of the focus on the Wood Bridge, which is the emblem of the community, the village of Woodbridge. You've got on a clear day, you've got some really beautiful views of the mountains, and heavy emphasis on safety, security, cleanliness, order, and separation from traffic. So when you read the Altman and Schemmer's article on dimensions of communities that are often in tension with each other, such as individuality versus community, or orderliness versus disorder, you can see how Irvine and its villages place a pretty heavy emphasis on order and sort of community identity rather than a lot of individuality per se. And we'll see this more in contrast with some other neighborhoods that offer different emphases. And then, of course, Irvine was intended to have an array of third places and recreational options. Some would say that our offerings of recreational spaces are kind of limited here. We have our farmers market, and we have, in the next slide, we've got some third places here at UCI along the Ring Mall and Anteater Ballpark. So we're doing better than when the university first opened in terms of providing more choices. But if you compare this university to Westwood or to Berkeley or places like that, you might find a higher percentage of sort of diverse places offered in communities like that. So each of these different choices of where to live have different loadings on Altman and Schemmer's dimensions of individuality, community, orderliness, disorder, things like that. Let's play the Irvine Company video. I want to play a video that was done by the Irvine Company planners to sort of market the community and herald the good things about it.
In the late 1950s, the stage was set for a historic decision on the Irvine Ranch. Nonstop growth was spreading toward the ranch from Los Angeles County, the oozing of molasses, as Irvine Company planners called it at the time.
When land holdings in California were at a huge scale, 50, 100, 200,000 acres, you could plan a master plan community. In the case of Irvine, the Irvine Ranch was held together. It wasn't broken up and sold off into pieces. So the opportunity, the really unique opportunity, came to allow for a master plan of some 100,000 acres. It was really extraordinary.
The Irvine Ranch today is an international model of the benefits of thoughtful, long-term master planning. Beautiful, walkable residential villages, vibrant job centers, attractive retail centers, outstanding schools, abundant parks, an uncommonly high standard of living, and a level of consistency and best-in-class quality realized through the vision of a single owner. Keeping the ranch whole under one owner has had another long-term benefit. It enabled the Irvine Company to permanently preserve more than half the entire ranch, some 50,000 acres, as parks, trails, and open space.
It's been a company that planned for the long term, and so it just allows for consistency of excellence that you don't find in other landowners.
Okay, so that's a pretty representative of sort of the pride that the Irvine Company feels in having developed this community here with its emphasis on the natural environment and all the other kinds of amenities that are here. Yeah. So Amber's saying that Irvine does a pretty good job at providing natural amenities and safety, but when it comes to diverse third places, it's kind of lacking. And so the question was, do other planned communities like Columbia, Maryland, Reston, Virginia, provide a richer array of third places? I don't know the exact answer to that. I have been in Reston, and they have a pretty interesting downtown area. Irvine doesn't really have a central downtown. It's got the UCI area. It's got the Spectrum. So it's hard to really compare across those different planned communities in terms of who does better in providing diverse third places. But generally, I think they are a little bit lower than on more organically grown environments where you've had a kind of spontaneous growth of places, whether that be Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco or Westwood, or places that aren't quite so planned, where there's more sort of spontaneous development of different kind of land uses. So when you have all this planning, you get certain benefits out of it in terms of maintaining high levels of scenic quality and safety, low traffic volume compared to if you drive down Harbor Boulevard, you've got a lot of traffic, but you've also got all the power lines overhead. So aesthetically and visually, it's not as kind of nice an experience as driving through Irvine, where you've got more park-like kind of areas and all the wires are buried, the cables are underground. So Irvine does a pretty good job. Most planned communities do a good job on those dimensions, but when it comes to that diversity and that sort of spontaneity, you look at, can any of you think of other communities nearby that might be a little different that way? Where there's not so much emphasis on community, there's a little bit more emphasis on individuality. Where there's maybe a little more scatter and not quite so much orderliness. Laguna Beach, okay, there's one. And when we look at, go to the slide, the Altman slide, on the different dimensions. There you go. Yeah, when you look at places like Irvine as compared to Laguna Beach, you're going to see In Laguna, a lot more emphasis on individuality and on diversity of different kinds of lifestyles. And that's one of the things that Richard Florida was talking about, that communities that have that kind of diversity and tolerance, he would claim, are going to be more successful at drawing creative people. Even though some would say Irvine has the industrial park development, the Spectrum Business Center, it's got the university here to draw in a lot of creative people. But on some of these other dimensions, it would score lower than a place like Laguna Beach. And you can go to Richard Florida's website, and he's got cities listed or ranked according to his index of attractiveness or favorability for people who are part of what he calls the creative class. Yes, Amber's saying, how do you get that balance in a place like Irvine? Can you have your safety but also have your diversity too, and also have great schools? And I think what the Irvine Company has tried to do is market to people that want the nuclear family emphasis. They want a lot of recreation opportunities for kids, whether that be soccer fields, baseball diamonds. And, per capita, there's more of that in Irvine than you'd find in Laguna Beach. So I think there are trade-offs, and people do make trade-offs and choices about what they're trying to optimize. And part of it depends on somebody's lifestyle, what stage of life they're in, whether they're looking to meet a lot of people or they want to kind of settle down. So a lot of those choices come out in the housing choices that people make. A lot of those preferences get borne out in those choices. Now we're going to play for you sort of the unofficial video on Irvine, the one that was created by some of Kevin's friends at Woodbridge High School, the Woodbridge Warriors.
Here we go, yo, it's the SFCC, holding it down for the IRV, get a helmet on. Cruising Culver on a bike, the IPD always creeping in the night. Golden spoon, frozen yogurt is endless. French vanilla plus cookie dough equals tremendous. Alton Square, yeah, it's where the party's at. Cruise it around the crossroads and then bring it back, slow it down. On the loop, there's a stop sign, WVA flow. In the summertime, Irvine, yeah, you know the deal. Woodbridge is where I'm from, we keep it real. Look left and right, cause jaywalking ain't chill. You smell me? Rolling through the fight, not a worry on my mind as I roll through a stop sign. If you need a date to prom, just ask the mayor. That crown, for sure she will look long.
Alright, let me do this. Driving down Yale, got the center in sight. It's late Friday night, and Del Taco just sounds right. I'm gonna buy myself some tacos for me and some friends. Gonna chill in the parking lot till 3 a.m. Issue when the fun ever ends. It don't. Okay. Driving down the freeway, take out your maps. We go into the Spectrum to walk a few laps. Weaving out of traffic, just hitting the gaps. Every time in I-Town we have a few laughs. Meet me at the fountain, looking so fresh. This city's the best.
Stop at a party, put in a CD, bump up the bass and rock out to Cure Party.
Okay, so that's a little different than the Irvine Company promotional video. What do you think, Kevin? You like that one? Pretty accurate. Yeah, so third place is in Irvine. Golden Spoon, yogurt, Del Taco, parking lots. Sounds kind of dreary. But anyway, it's a pretty interesting take on growing up in the bubble of a planned community. I'm going to read something to you now that sort of gets to this issue we've been talking about in Altman and Schemers. And it's a children's book called The Big Orange Spot. Any of you read this before? Okay, it's kind of a short story, so I'll just read it to you. Mr. Plumbean lived on a street where all the houses were the same. That's what his street looked like. He liked it that way. So did everybody else on Mr. Plumbean's street. This is a neat street, they would say. Then one day, a seagull flew over Mr. Plumbean's house. He was carrying a can of bright orange paint. No one knows why. And he dropped the can, no one knows why, right over Mr. Plumbean's house. And this is the result of that. It made a big orange spot on Mr. Plumbean's house. Oh, too bad, everybody said. Mr. Plumbean will have to paint his house again. I suppose I will, said Mr. Plumbean. But he didn't paint his house right away. He looked at the big orange spot for a long time. Then he went about his business. The neighbors got tired of seeing that big orange spot. So someone said, Mr. Plumbean, we wish you'd get around to painting your house. Okay, said Mr. Plumbean. He got some blue paint and some white paint, and that night he got busy. He painted at night because it was cooler. When the paint was gone, the roof was blue, the walls were white, and the big orange spot was still there. And he got some more paint. He got red paint, yellow paint, green paint, and purple paint. In the morning, the other people on the street came out of their houses. Their houses were all the same, but Mr. Plumbean's house was like a rainbow. It was like a jungle. It was like an explosion. There was the big orange spot, and there were little orange spots. There were stripes. There were pictures of elephants and lions and pretty girls and steam shovels. The people said, Plumbean has popped his cork, flipped his wig, blown his stack, and dropped his stopper. They went away muttering. That night, Mr. Plumbean bought carpenter's tools. He built a tower on top of his roof, and he painted a clock on the tower. The next day, the people said, Plumbean has gushed his mush, lost his marbles, and slipped his hawser. They decided they would pretend not to notice. That very night, Mr. Plumbean got a truck full of green things. He painted palm trees, baobabs, thorn bushes, onions, and frangipani. In the morning, he bought a hammock and an alligator. When other people came out of their houses, they saw Mr. Plumbean swinging in a hammock between two palm trees. They saw an alligator lying in the grass. Mr. Plumbean was drinking lemonade. He's having a good old time. Plumbean has gone too far. This used to be a neat street. Plumbean, what have you done to your house? The people shouted. My house is me and I am it. My house is where I like to be, and it looks like all my dreams, Mr. Plumbean said. The people went away. They asked the man who lived next door to Mr. Plumbean to go and have a talk with him. Tell him that we all liked it here before he changed his house. Tell him that his house has to be the same as ours so we can have a neat street. The man went to see Mr. Plumbean that evening. They sat under the palm trees drinking lemonade and talking all night long. Early the next morning, the man went out to get lumber and rope and nails and paint. When the people came out of their houses, they saw a red and yellow ship next door to the house of Mr. Plumbean. What have you done to your house? They shouted at the man. My house is me and I am it. My house is where I like to be, and it looks like all my dreams, said the man, who had always loved ships. He's just like Plumbean, the people said. He's got bees in his bonnet, bats in his belfry, and knots in his noodle. Then one by one, they went to see Mr. Plumbean late at night. They would sit under the palm trees and drink lemonade and talk about their dreams. And whenever anybody visited Mr. Plumbean's house, the very next day, that person would set about changing his own house to fit his dreams. So these are some of the new entries on the block. So much for uniform design guidelines and building codes. Got a castle, Parthenon. So that's what the street's looking like. Whenever a stranger came to the street of Mr. Plumbean and his neighbors, the stranger would say, "This is not a neat street." Then all the people would say, "Our street is us and we are it. Our street is where we like to be and it looks like all our dreams." And that's the end. Now, the Big Orange Splot is right on target in terms of the principles of community and individuality that Altman and Schemers talk about in their book, because it's really a parable about the tension between these two different sides of the continuum in planned communities. And if any of you want to look up that book and maybe get a copy, the author again is Daniel Pinkwater, published in 1977. Now, if we look at Laguna Beach as a contrast to Irvine, planned community of Irvine, what we see is that in Laguna Beach, you have greater emphasis on individuality as compared to communality. So in the top right-hand corner of that slide, you see a pink building. There are no color codes, design codes that prohibit people from painting their homes various different colors, pastels and whatever they would like to do. You also see less concern about orderliness and greater emphasis on diversity. So sometimes if you go down to the boardwalk at Main Beach Park there, you'll see vagrants laying on the benches, not fitting in with a perfectly ordered community. In the bottom of that slide, you see the Laguna Beach Art Museum. So that museum brings in excellent exhibits on a monthly basis. So there's more diversity, some would say, if you compare that community to the city of Irvine. Now, comparing Laguna Beach and Irvine to Ebenezer Howard's Garden Cities of the 1800s in England, here you see a blend of individuality and communality or community, but you do have greater homogeneity or uniformity as compared to diversity, and a stronger emphasis on order and orderliness than the lack of that. The way you see the blend of individuality and community is that Ebenezer Howard wanted to provide very healthful and wholesome environments for people to realize their individual and family potentials. But he did that in the context of a very structured and sort of uniform set of design guidelines for garden cities. So the emphasis on community and order was really greater, or took precedence over the emphasis on individuality. And also, he didn't really talk about things like bringing art museums and different opportunities for diversity of interests and recreational pursuits. His emphasis was largely on the green environment, bringing people into nature where they'd have a wholesome environment, in contrast to the pollution and the congestion of industrialized England and London. Closer to home, on the East Coast, in Columbia, Maryland, you see an emphasis on identity and community cohesion, but more on community cohesion, I would say, in the sense that there's a very set recipe or approach to designing a village, where you have the town-wide arterial and the village collector road that goes off of that arterial, and then you have several different neighborhoods linked to that village collector. Each of those has a neighborhood center, and each of those has some open green space or park. So there's a repeating plan for each of the villages, and for that matter, each of the neighborhoods within the villages. They all have a set of elements that are always present in each of those community units. So there is a greater emphasis on community cohesion and order in that sense. So here in East Bluff, near the Irvine campus, which is part of Newport Beach, you see the cul-de-sac street design, which is very reminiscent of the Columbia, Maryland design that I showed you. And here you have that collector road that runs through the neighborhood, and coming off of each area of that collector road, or using the same road, are these clusters of homes. And in order to go into that neighborhood and come out, you have to use that same street. You can't go in on one street and make a left or right turn and go out on a different street. So everybody has the opportunity to observe who's coming in and out of the community. They have opportunities to get to know each other or to recognize each other in terms of who belongs there or who doesn't. So the emphasis there in terms of the Altman and Chemers principles is very much on order and community. And finally, in this example that's discussed by Altman and Chemers in their book, it's the habitat development that was created for the World's Fair in Montreal, Canada. And if you look at this design, you would think, well, it's pretty much cookie-cutter apartments in that complex, so the emphasis is truly on community rather than individuality. Although what the designers did is they tried to incorporate some variety in terms of the floor plans of each of those apartment models. So they tried to build some diversity and individuality into the broader context of community and orderliness. Now, because we've been talking about a number of examples of planned communities, what I'd like to do now is focus in a little bit more specifically on the planned community of Irvine, since our campus at UCI is located right in the middle of one of the largest planned communities in the U.S. So I'm going to show you some 35mm slides that track the early history of Irvine and reflect the design principles and goals that the developers of Irvine were trying to promote here. This is the book we mentioned by Burby and Weiss in 1976, and this is a schematic view of Columbia, one of the first new towns, which was developed even before Irvine began to take shape. And one of the elements of Columbia is this people tree sculpture. And I mentioned before that their emphasis there is on racial integration and harmony. And this people tree idea is intended to make the point, and this is right in this one of the public central points of the town, to make the point that everybody's collected or connected to each other like family. Regardless of their ethnicity, regardless of their race, they're integrated together as family. So that was a very strong theme in Columbia. Another thing they tried to do was to minimize signage and sort of obtrusive design. So even the grocery stores have these very unobtrusive signs that are built into kind of the texture of the wall there, rather than something overhead that stands out and creates a less organic feel. This is the village hierarchy I mentioned to you before in terms of how the neighborhoods are nested within the village. So the gradient idea, from going from very public to more private, is strong there. Now, Irvine was incorporated as a city in 1971. One of the features of a planned community is that it has a long-range plan that goes out 100 years in a lot of cases. It says exactly what's going to happen for each year in terms of what's going where, how the land is going to be used. This is an early sort of marketing ad for the city of Irvine showing all the nice natural features and diverse activities here. This is an ad by the president of the Fluor Corporation saying why he moved his company here in the 1970s, because Irvine was such a phenomenal place to live for families and one of the highest quality environments he could find. So this is the original Fluor Corporation building on Michelson there that many of you have seen. But every planned community has a long-range plan, and within that plan there are elements relating to housing, relating to commercial and retail space, relating to schools, relating to churches. So we'll walk through some of those different uses. This is in 1973 when I took this picture of University Town Center. That's all there was. There was no buildings there. There might have been a Bank America branch, Bank of America there. But basically, the long-range plan was saying that this was going to be built up as a kind of mixed-use commercial site. So when I first came to Irvine, every parcel of land just about had a sign announcing what was going to go there when. And there were signs like this showing, okay, over there where the floor buildings are, that's going to be Irvine's industrial area. Although we don't really have heavy industry, we have more of a light manufacturing or research and development, but not a lot of heavy industry. In various areas now that are built up, you'd see these signs showing where the schools were going to go and where the senior centers were going to go. Irvine actually has at least two senior centers, one near the campus off of Rancho San Joaquin and the other in Woodbridge off of Lakeview. So The idea was to create a city that was integrated in terms of different age groups as well. So you'd have places for kids, for teenagers, for older people as well. And this is the kind of, just to give you that sense again of the sort of massive quality of the Civic building, the Civic Center in Irvine. Even though it's not in a very central place in the city, you know that's the type of building it is when you see it because of the kind of design it has, the different features, the granite, the clock tower. Another aspect of planned communities was to emphasize the homogenation of people's religions. So rather than having one religion stand out or stand above others, you had these worship centers planned where different types of religious communities would share the same space. So this was before this area here at the corner of, I think it's University and Harvard, where you have some different congregations sharing those buildings there. And you can see that in other parts of Irvine. Here, at one point, there was a United Congregation Church sharing this space with a synagogue, which is another example of sort of using the same space for a couple of different denominations. This is the Greek Orthodox Church. There are Mormon churches in Irvine, mosques. This is the Buddhist temple in Irvine along, I think it's Jamboree. So let's take a little more look at the residential unit of the long-range plan. So this was taken along Culver Drive before there was a West Park. And that's all there was. You could see the El Toro helicopter base over there. But other than that, it was all dirt, and they were just getting started on creating these housing tracts. So this is the housing element of the Irvine long-range plan. And the concept was to create several different village choices for people, from Turtle Rock in the south here and the area around the university on out to Northwood. And they were to be well-defined in terms of their collector roads, so they'd have a kind of sense of identity. They were to be buffered from high-volume traffic. And, we had the road hierarchy sort of separating out the freeways from the interior of each of those villages. And in the early 70s, the Irvine Company opened up a home finding center, which was a very popular place. And people would go in for the privilege of buying a house, and the market was rapidly escalating and appreciating. Sometimes the market would go up $30,000 in 6 months. It was crazy. University Park is one of the villages in Irvine, and it's typified or characterized by these really nice park and greenbelt areas, very consistent with Ebenezer Howard's principles. The road signs in University Park all emphasize natural features, willow trees, and they're made out of natural materials rather than these street signs that are more obtrusive to create that human scale. Here's an area called Park Rest with the street called Shasta. So you can see the emphasis on nature throughout this community. And people like that. They pay good money to have that proximity to nature, even though you're giving up some other kind of amenities and diversity. This is the Cambs River in Cambridge, England, and I had good fortune to visit that place for a conference. And it's a very beautiful rural community, university town, where people punt along the river here. And some of these ideals from the English countryside were brought into the planned communities, such as Irvine. This is a country road where people are out for a bike ride in the wilderness area. It's not wilderness, you've got a road, but it's fairly undeveloped area. So these kind of images of what people like, this sort of healthful outdoor lifestyle, were incorporated into the design plans for Irvine. So we have this village of Woodbridge, and you've got the human-made lakes here, and this was intended to give people these opportunities to go boating on the lake for recreation. Maybe you don't have a lot of nightclubs, but you can go out on your lake and go fishing and go boating. You can take bike rides along the park there, in Woodbridge. So it's very pleasant, visually. So again, that kind of emphasis on the garden city ideal. Here, back to the road hierarchy, where you've got the different levels of roads, with the freeways, of course, being the uppermost or the busiest number 5 level. And then from that, you have plans, very, very particular streetscape principles. This is for a major north-south throughway. How would you plant the median strip and the sides of the road to give it that legibility so people would know they're on level 4 road, north-south arterial? And this is one of those roads, Culver Drive. So you can see as you go down Culver, you've got, that very predictable kind of planting in the median strip and the street trees on the side, which a lot of cities don't have. That's one of the amenities people like here. Here you've got a major east-west throughway with different kinds of shrubs and trees. And so that's the kind of plan that's followed for a street like Barranca. And those of you that have lived in or know Woodbridge have been down this street many times. But very nice walkable area because you've got the street trees buffering pedestrians from the cars. You've got the median strip to slow down some of the traffic. So it's very much taking into account Appleyard's findings on livable streets, right? Creating sort of traffic calming and walkability. And we talked about this as being kind of a treatment for a gateway entrance to a village so that you're announcing that gradient, that intimacy gradient from the very public arterial street here into the more private village. So even though there's no gate there, people know that they're crossing a threshold. They're going to a different level on that gradient. And this is what that looks like along Culver, where you have a street going into the village of West Park, where there's this very visible, monumental stone here announcing the village name. You've got the palm trees, some hedge work. As far as our third places go, it used to be called Edward Cinemas. Now it's Regal Cinemas at the Spectrum. But Irvine's claim to fame as far as third places go would be the Spectrum. Some would say that's sort of a faux artificial third place because it's just all constructed and designed, and people go there and they do the promenade around different parts of the Spectrum. Although a lot of people like it, hang out there, meet a lot of people there. So I'd be interested to hear some of your views about whether the Spectrum works as a third place. And this is Boomers. This is a recreational area for teenagers and kids that was built to try to accommodate the needs of younger people who were finding that they had to sort of hang out in the parking lot. So we saw in that video that was made by the Woodbridge students that they hang out in the parking lot sometimes in the shopping centers. And so the idea was, well, let's create a place where, people could go to the batting cages and they could do bumper cars and sort of place oriented toward kids more. And the Architecture Foundation of Orange County actually has created a very nice coloring book for different architecture in Orange County. And if any of you are interested in a copy of that, if you know kids that might like a coloring book about Orange County, I can put you in touch with some copies. Okay. We're going to take a little break. Certainly for crimes to happen, you have to have a motivated offender, somebody that wants to commit a crime and victimize somebody. And then you have to have some victims in the area that could be subjected to the crime, suitable targets. But the ecological part of it comes into play to the extent that the environment increases or minimizes chances for victimization. And anybody have an example of what we've read already that reduces crime? Somebody's article that talked about why certain areas in New York are low crime? Yeah. Jane Jacobs, where she talks about mixed uses and the fact that you have eyes on the street. A lot of different people using that space at different times of day. So the environmental opportunities is an important part of ecological theory of crime, because without those environmental opportunities, motivated offenders can't do their nasty victimization of targets. Also, environments that provide opportunities to lurk, hide behind hedges, places that don't have good surveillance, they're also more conducive to crime. So they lack that defensible space. Now, we talked about cul-de-sacs and the idea that cul-de-sacs reduce crime. And in fact, the research has shown that streets with cul-de-sac design have lower crime rates. And they do strengthen people's sense of identification with their secondary block territory. So you go out of the primary private territory of the home to the secondary area of the block. People meet each other. They identify with each other more closely in cul-de-sac streets. One of the problems of cul-de-sacs is that they're very hard to get to and to navigate. So if somebody needs emergency help, emergency responders, they're going to have a hard time getting there because of the way the streets are laid out. So that's one of the downsides in terms of emergency vehicle access. Amanda is asking whether gates and boundaries around neighborhoods or residential spaces are a good thing in terms of reducing crime, because if the fences are too high and somebody comes in, nobody can see them sort of burglarizing the house. So there are different designs. Even a low-rise shrub can be as effective as a territorial marker as a higher gate. So it's a good question. Sometimes those gates have unintended consequences. Just like putting a gate in front of a community can have an unintended consequence. Rather than making people feel safer, that makes them feel more like they have to be defended and somebody's going to attack them if they get past that gate. So there's some downsides to gated communities as well. I was just asking whether shrubbery and landscaping are good territorial markers. And when you read the article by Barbara Brown on burglary and defensible space, you see that definitely landscaping is a very important part of the territorial system. It can be just as effective as a wall, actually, in providing the visible boundaries. So, back to Newman, features of an environment that bring it under the control of occupants and promote opportunities for surveillance. Some kind of environments do that pretty well. And in this slide, you can actually get this book from our website. If you go and you click on the link for Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design, you could get the published design guidelines created by Oscar Newman, which takes his theory and makes recommendations to how you create territorial boundaries, how you create safe residential communities. So that's on our website if you go to the home page. Now, there are some disadvantages and critiques of defensible space theory. For one thing, it's criticized for being too deterministic. Just because you put up a gate or just because you put up a shrub doesn't mean that it's going to make the place safer. And a lot depends on what's going on inside the prospective criminal's head and the potential victim's head. How do they perceive the environment? Do they really feel it's safer or not? So these mediational psychological processes are very important in understanding whether a neighborhood, the way it's designed, is safe or not. There needs to be more attention, and this is something that Barbara Brown argues, she's at the University of Utah, to the very specific design features of places that increase defensible space. And we're going to take a look at some examples she talks about in the next few slides. Sometimes this emphasis on defensible space creates too much of a they-we kind of division and makes people worry that they have to be more segmented and segregated. So there's a kind of defensive quality to the concept itself. And then some have argued that the research itself has used bias samples and measurement approaches. So it's not completely a research area that's taken for granted as being completely valid, but definitely Oscar Newman's ideas have had a tremendous influence on actually designing guidelines for residential communities. Now, this is Barbara Brown's theory, Brown and Altman. And what she's saying here, one of the questions on the midterm exam is what makes environmental psychology different from other areas of social ecology? A lot of the areas in social ecology have an ecological perspective and are applying research to community problems. What makes environmental psychology unique is it focuses on the psychological and behavioral processes that link the environment to specific behavioral or health outcomes. So Barbara and Irv Altman are saying that if the environment includes certain kind of symbolic barriers, actual barriers, detectability factors, and physical traces of residents' presence, that's going to create cognitions or feelings, certain kinds of feelings and perceptions in residents' and burglars' heads, and that determines whether there's going to be victimization or security. So the physical environment is mediated by these psychological processes that then explain whether crime occurs or not. So that's the basic assumption of the model. And in their theory, they have these four classes of environmental features that determine defensible space. Symbolic barriers like welcome mats, personalized signs, color schemes that characterize a particular house. Actual barriers like locks, alarms, guards, gates, walls. Physical traces of presence or absence, such as lights being on in the home. Some people buy light timers when they're away, so it looks like somebody's home. So that creates a physical trace of presence. Cars and driveways. Some people will hook up those timers to their stereo system, their sound system, so that it sounds like somebody's home. The TV's on. If you see uncollected mail or newspapers in the driveway, that's a cue that nobody's been around for a while. So potential burglars look for those cues of presence or absence, those physical traces. And then detectability has more to do with, is the gate squeaky so you hear someone coming in? Do you have a barking dog? Do you have other auditory or visual cues that someone's home or is not home? So these are what they classify as territorial indicators that determine people's cognitions, whether you're a potential burglar or somebody living in that home, whether it's a safe environment, whether it's a potential environment that could be hit effectively if you're a burglar. And burglars, we know, stay away from certain kind of environments that look too territorial. And that's what research, some of the studies by Brown and Altman have found. They've actually interviewed former burglars who were caught and asked them, okay, here's a picture of a house with certain kinds of features. Would this be one that you would victimize or not? And they find some really interesting patterns in those responses. So when they looked at which homes were highly burglarized or less burglarized, they found some of these key differences. The burglarized homes had no symbolic identity markers, absence of actual barriers, so you don't see any shrubbery or low-rise gate in this house here. Low detectability, so not a lot of evidence somebody's home or not. And few, if any, traces of presence. And public street signs, somehow even having a traffic speed sign makes that environment seem a little more public, and that makes it more vulnerable to victimization. And it was a really interesting, unexpected finding that public street signs can have that effect on crime patterns. The non-burglarized homes had much more symbolic identity markers, actual barriers like fences or shrubs, detectability features where you could tell if someone's home or not. And you can see here where it says the Smiths on that part of the house. That's a symbolic identity marker. Traces of presence, garages. A lot of times when you have a garage that's closed, you don't know if there's a car in it or not. And few, if any, public street signs. So these were the less burglarized kind of homes. Very interesting finding in their studies. Now, if you look at Crystal Cove, which is a very high-income area along Pacific Coast Highway between Corona del Mar and Laguna Beach, you can see how in this gated community, you can see some of these actual and symbolic barriers and other kinds of markers. So here you see a symbolic marker. It's not a gate or a fence, but it's a really kind of strong statement that you're entering an important community here, Crystal Cove. And when you go through these, on the sidewalk between these two columns, you know that you're entering a place that people care about because of the amount of resource that's been put into that landscaping and that design. So these prominent stone columns indicate this transition from public to private, and that's part of this intimacy gradient idea. Here you've got actual barriers. You have a gate in this gated community, and you have a guardhouse. And the vehicles have to go through there, and they don't pass through if they don't have the right code or they haven't been cleared by a resident. So these are designed to increase the resident's sense of community and security, although some research on gated communities by Seth Allo at City University of New York has found that they have just the opposite effects on neighborhoods. They make people in the neighborhood feel that it's a less safe place because people have to resort to so much security and guarding. And here you've got some symbolic and actual barriers. So this landscaping and elevation here symbolically conveys that you're going from the secondary space to the more primary private space, just like we saw in design guidelines for defensible space, using elevation and landscaping. Here you've got the bars on the window, which is an actual barrier. It makes it harder to get through, break that window and get in. So that's an example of what they mean by actual barriers. So really what Altman and Brown's theory is trying to do, and their research has done, it's taken a very general concept of defensible space and has operationalized it, made it much more specific as to what specific features do you need in an environment, from actual to symbolic barriers, detectability, cues of presence. How do those mediate what people are going to think or feel whether you're a prospective criminal or somebody who might be victimized, and then that all determines whether the crime happens or not. So it's an attempt to sort of unpack the assumptions and details, the environmental details of defensible space theory through this theory that Barbara Brown and Irv Altman came up with.